thank you all for joining us this afternoon for a conversation of page to screen with Jonathan Coe. Thank you for being here, Jonathan.
My pleasure. It's been great so far.
Hopefully he'll say that in 30 minutes. I'd like to introduce you to Jonathan Coe if you don't already know him. Jonathan Coe is an award-winning English novelist, biographer, critic, and scriptwriter. His novels include the highly acclaimed bestsellers What a Carve Up, The Rotters Club, Number 11, and his latest novel, Middle England. His work has received many awards, including the Prix de Meilleur Livre étranger for What a Carve Up in 1995, the Prix Medici étranger for The House of Sleep in 1998, the Bollinger Everyman Woodhouse Prize for The Rotters Club in 2001, and in 2005, the Samuel Johnson Prize for his book Like a Fiery Elephant, a biography of the novelist B.S. Johnson. In 2004, he was made Chevalier de l'Ordre des Arts et des Lettres. So thank you. Our conversation today is framed by the idea of page to screen and the adaptation of your novel, which I have here, The Terrible Privacy of Maxwell Sim, which came out in 2009 in England and in lots of other countries immediately after that, including France, where it was the title of the novel in French?
Same as the film, yes.
It was the same as the film.
La vie très privée.
La vie très privée de Monsieur Sim, which was then made into a film, which we will see right after our short conversation, in 2015, directed by Michel Leclerc. Both the novel and the film tell the story of a 50-something salesman by the name of Sim, and they are both centered on a period, a quite dark period of Mr. Sim's life, in which his wife has left him and taken his daughter. He has lost his job, and he is experiencing a quite serious depression. Despite all of this, both the novel and the film are quite funny, which is something that Jonathan does very well in many of his novels, is this expression of humor in tragedy. So the sort of central action of both the novel and the film is that Mr. Sim is hired for a promotional event to drive and sell environmentally friendly toothbrushes made of boar's bristles to a certain region of his country. And the story follows his adventures, which take him both forward, but also send him looking backward into previous parts of his life. So before we speak specifically about the adaptation to the film, I'd actually love to ask you first, there is a marvelous story within a story in both the novel and the film that has to do with a true story of the amateur sailor Donald Crowhurst and his failed attempt to sail around the world. So when I was reading the book, and then obviously when watching the film, I wondered did the novel originate with Donald Crowhurst, or did Donald Crowhurst end up in the novel?
My books are often I often see them described as being filmic or cinematic. But I think that what that really means is that I refer to lots of films, real films or invented films in my books. And I use some cinematic techniques like flashbacks and flash forwards and jump cuts and so on. But in fact, most of my books are rather hard to adapt for the screen, I think, because they have quite elaborate plots and they jump backwards and forwards in time a lot. And I always thought that Monsieur Sim, even when I was writing it, was probably would be an easier novel to adapt than most of my books, because it's basically linear. And it's based on the idea of the road movie. Because in the book, Maxwell Sim is hired to drive from London to Shetland in the very north of the United Kingdom. In the film, he drives from I think it's Bourg-en-Bresse that
he leaves from Bourg-en-Bresse.
That he leaves from and is meant to drive to the south of France. But within that linear narrative, because typically for me that would have been too easy just to write a linear narrative like that, I chose, for various perverse reasons, to insert 4 separate flashbacks and digressions, quite substantial ones. 2 of these are flashbacks to Monsieur Sim's earlier life. One of them is a flashback to his father's earlier life, which is rendered very beautifully in the film, I think, towards the end. And then the 4th one is this story, this real story of a British mariner and yachtsman called Donald Crowhurst, who in 1968 entered the Sunday Times Round the World yacht race and didn't survive the experience. Actually, I won't tell you the full story of what happens to him, because it's told very well in the film itself. But it was never my plan to put that in the novel. The novel and the film are really stories about loneliness and technology, and whether the connectivity that we have nowadays in our lives makes us more or less lonely. Actually, the inspiration for the book, if I can pinpoint a particular moment, was a cartoon I saw. I can't remember which magazine now. It showed a church with a very sparsely attended, dismal funeral service, where there were only 2 or 3 mourners. And the dead person's wife is seen standing at the door to the church saying, "I don't understand it. He had 200 friends on Facebook." And that made me laugh, but it also made me very sad, and made me think about the quality and the reality of our virtual relationships. And Monsieur Sim, as you will see, being portrayed wonderfully by Jean-Pierre Bacri, is a very lonely person, even though he has more technology at his disposal to connect him with other people than at any other time in history, probably.
And that idea is rendered so beautifully. I won't give it away, but in the book, there's a small sort of meditation in the thoughts of Maxwell Sim about Facebook. And in the film, it's rendered in a line of dialogue, which you will see, which is quite lovely. So speaking about these 2, book and film, in such close connection, the film, La vie très privée de Monsieur Sim, it follows the novel really closely. And I'm curious, was there a difference or differences that surprised you between the 2? Can I get a show of hands? Who's actually read the book and or seen the film? Okay, great. So that's helpful. Were there differences that surprised you, delighted you, enraged you?
Well, I wouldn't have agreed to introduce the film if I didn't like it. And I do really like it. If I have a criticism of the film, it's that it's too faithful to the book. Or it tries to be too faithful to the book, because as I said, film is a medium for linear storytelling, starting at point A and going to point Z and going in the correct order. I chopped that up and interrupted that in the novel, and you can do that in a novel more elegantly and without disturbing the reader as much as you can in a film. So, as I said, there are 4 digressive episodes or flashbacks in the novel, and Michel Leclerc and his partner Baya tried to include all of them. Yeah. I think there's one of them that maybe they should have just left on the cutting room floor, because it interrupts the flow of the present day narrative. But it's a great luxury for a writer to be able to say, well, the film was too faithful to the book.
Yeah, absolutely. It is surprisingly
often the other way around. Yeah. So no, on the whole, I was delighted with it. The other thing is that the film ends differently to the book.
Yes.
but that was something I agreed with Michel the very first day we met and started talking about it. Yeah. He said, you know, the ending of the book, I don't think we're going to be able to do that. And I saw his reasoning completely. And in fact, a lot of people don't like the ending of the book, so it was a nice opportunity to try it out without it.
It is really interesting because the end of the book has a surprise, which obviously I won't give away. And when I finished the book and was getting ready to see the film, I kept thinking, how are they going to do that? Is that going to be possible at all? So it is very interesting, and it doesn't change anything about the understanding of either, really, kind of. No, it does. It does.
You will notice about 30 minutes into the film that the screen is kind of lit up and illuminated and brought to life by a cameo from myself. Originally, this is very brief. You know, if you will blink and miss it. But originally, this was Jean-Pierre Bacry's own idea to try and incorporate some element of the ending of the book, because the ending of the book involves an authorial intrusion. Yeah. And Monsieur Bacry said, well, if we can't do it at the ending, why doesn't Jonathan appear in the scene and say this line, which he wrote for me. But inexplicably, they cut my line. Which I spoke in my perfect French, and then I came to see the film and it was gone. And you know, I think that's my main problem with the film, actually, is that they cut my line.
But it raises an interesting question about the fact that no matter how faithful you want to be between a book and a film, sometimes you actually have to translate it in a very different way. So this idea that they would have put this authorial intrusion in the middle of the book would have been a way to do that without doing it exactly in the same way that it's done in the book, which makes me think a lot about the character of Maxwell Sim. So in the English book, he's Maxwell Sim. In the French, he is François Sim. And obviously, they're not exactly the same person. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. How did it feel to you to see this extremely Englishman, if we can say that, rendered as quite a Frenchman?
I think it works really well, but you know, I've never really bought this idea that my books are quintessentially British or English, as some people describe them, because you know they're very British on the surface, I think. And the landscape described in the novel of Monsieur Sim is very British, and it's full of the brand names of British shops and British fast food outlets and that kind of thing. And of course, all that has had to be changed and replaced with French equivalents. But you know, we're becoming a homogenous culture throughout Europe, so every country has these same kinds of chains and brands. I mean, I remember when my first books were published, which is a long time ago now, the 1980s. My first novel was not translated into any other languages, and I asked my agent why, and he said, well, we tried, but everybody said it was too British. And then I wrote another novel, which was also not translated into any other languages, and I said, what's the problem here? He said, they're too British. Then I wrote a third novel, which was translated into Dutch, but no other languages. And I spoke to my agent. I said, too British? He said, yes. So I thought, okay, well, now I know what kind of writer I am. I'm a quintessentially British writer, so I'm going to run with that. And I wrote a novel called Watercarver pour Testament à l'anglaise, which is saturated with British cultural references and political references and very obscure references to British films, which nobody outside Britain has heard of. And it was translated into 16 languages, and my agent kept phoning me up every day and saying, the French love it, they've bought it, the Germans love it, they've bought it. And I said, well, what do they like about it so much? And he said, it's so British. And what I learned from that is that there is there's a sweet spot you can hit where too British becomes so British, and so British is good and too British is bad.
That's interesting.
So you know, I mean the serious side of the story is that What a Carve Up is a better novel than those first three, and that's really why it was translated into other languages, and they weren't. And you know, I think I was beginning to find my voice with What a Carve Up, so I was hitting a kind of a more universal vein of storytelling, which translated, you know, outside its cultural specificity, and hopefully that's what Monsieur Sim does as well.
Well, this is interesting to me as well, because one of the things I really enjoyed about the book, The Terrible Privacy of Maxwell Sim, is how much English politics, social, I don't want to say commentary, but sort of the basic facts of what it's like to live in England, more or less now, 2010. It's not an old book, and when we talk about the difference between the book and the film, this was something I felt was quite different. It is still that, I want to say, politics, although it's quite subtle in the book. This is a story of relationships and people and technology for sure, but there is an undercurrent of what's going on in England at this time. Why has he lost his job? What's going on with families and things like that? And this was in the film for sure, but much subtler. And I was curious how you felt about that. Did you miss it?
Not really, because as you say, it's one of my less overtly political books. It's more focused on relationships and the state of relationships in our modern technological landscape, and the politics. When I look back on the novel now, is a little bit shoehorned in. I think. I mean, it's, you know, maybe I was putting some of it in because people. That's one of the things that people expect from me as a writer these days. And I was writing it when the financial crisis had just broken, really, or was breaking, in fact, because I was writing it in 2008. So it seemed kind of perverse not to allude to that. And as you say, you know, to make it the obvious reason why the firm he's working for has gone bust and he's lost his job and so on. So it's all there in the background, but it's not what the book is about. And there are moments in the novel when I tried to make it what the book was about, and those are the less successful parts of the novel, I think. And Michel and Bayer saw that and just said, no, this is actually a story of a lonely man who, you know, during the course of this journey, this real journey by car, discovers his true nature, his identity, and becomes much more settled and comfortable in the world as a result.
There's something, he has a little bit of help on his journey in both the novel and the film. He develops a relationship with a woman who's in the car with him, a quite unexpected woman in the car with him. In the novel, her name is Emma, and this is the voice of his GPS. And they have some really lovely conversations. And so in terms of differences between film and book, sometimes you lose things and sometimes you gain things. And something I absolutely loved about the film is that her name is not Emma in the film. Her name is Emmanuel. And this very, very slight nod to even just an idea of a savior was beautiful to me, that you don't have in the book. And I thought that was lovely. Going the other direction, is there something that was in the novel that you really would have loved to see in the film that wasn't there? I have a small favorite. One character didn't make it, and I really missed her.
Ah. Maybe you've read the book more recently than me, and you remember the characters better. No, there's one gag in the book with a mobile phone, which Michel shot, and which ended up on the cutting room floor, and that was sad for me because I thought it was one of the biggest laughs in the book and one of the biggest laughs in the film, but not characters. No, which perhaps you shouldn't tell. Perhaps you should tell me afterwards which character.
I can say. I'll say later.
Okay. Yeah.
Because she's not in the film, but she's in the book, so there's a reason to definitely go with both.
I mean, the GPS thing was real, and was the other inspiration for the novel. In 2007, we bought our first car, which had a built-in GPS, and it was very exciting. And we got it just before we went on holiday, and we were driving to Ireland. We were driving to Fishguard in South Wales to take the ferry to Ireland, and my wife was talking to me as we approached the ferry port. And I had the sat-nav on, and I was very excited. I liked the voice of the woman anyway. It was a nice, posh, well-spoken English voice. And she was telling me, you know, where to go and which turnings to take and so on. My wife was talking, and I was getting a bit irritated, actually. And then Emma, as I'd started to call her already, told me to turn left or turn right, and I didn't quite hear it because my wife was talking. I turned to my wife and said, "Shut up, will you? I'm listening to the sat-nav." And, you know, understandably, she was a little bit cross about this. And I thought, yes, you know, that's weird. At that moment, I was in a closer, more real, more engaged relationship with this disembodied voice than with the woman I'm married to. And, you know, so, you know, on the one hand, these technologically mediated relationships that we have are fake. On the other hand, they can be very real and very important.
And grounds for conversation with our spouses.
Yes.
So I think I can only ask you one last question. This is a short conversation. You, as you mentioned, you have a cameo appearance in the film. I hope you all spot him. Were you involved in any other way in the movement from book to film? Because I know you have been in some other.
No, not at all, and I didn't want to be. You know, I've learned my lesson in this respect. There was a film in the 90s of one of my books, a book of mine that I don't like particularly anymore, called Les Nains de l'Amour, and it didn't work at all as a film, and the blame for that, I think, lies squarely with the person who adapted it for the screen, which was me, and. You know, it made me realize that actually novelists are not the right people to adapt their own works for the screen, because we have too close a relationship with the original material. So I met Michel, and I met Bayer, his partner and co-writer, and we chatted for a day. And I just heard his ideas about it and came away from that thinking, right, I trust these people completely. And I just said, no, get on with it.
Yeah, lovely. And it is a lovely film, so I will let it begin. I need to let you all know that the film will be in French, and it does not have English subtitles. So if anyone desperately wants, I'll lend you my copy of the book for the duration of the film. And unfortunately, Jonathan is not going to be here to sign afterwards, but hopefully you've had a chance to get his books. They are, many of them, available upstairs in the library.
I have to leave for Geneva halfway through the film. So I just wanted to say that I've had a fantastic time at Bibliotopia. Thank you to everybody for inviting me here and running the festival so splendidly. And it's been a joy. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to the translators today.